Okay, so good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone participating today. Guten Abend und willkommen bei unseren Freunden aus Deutschland. I hope I just said good evening and welcome to our friends from Germany. My name is Art McGrath. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of Call to Action, Metro New York. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're so pleased to have you all here and to welcome our moderator and panelists for what I'm sure is going to be an important discussion about the work and lessons of the German Synodal Way. A special thanks to our panelists, Claudia and Margit from Germany, who have given up their Saturday evening to make this presentation possible during the daytime. In a few moments, I'll hand things over to co-director of Future Church, Deborah Rose, our co-sponsoring organization for today's event. We're very grateful to Future Church for their effort on this project, and especially for the handling of the technical aspects of today's webinar. For more than a year now, another member of the Call to Action Board of Directors, Jerry O'Shea, and I have been in communication with Dr. Gregor Maria Hoff, a theological advisor to the German Synodal Way, about the beginnings and challenges of the Synodal Way. Links to those discussions are available on our website. So why did we organize this webinar? We see the synodal path in its clearly focused agenda and forums as a prophetic and important sign of hope for our church. We hope that the absolute power that corrupts in the church, as we have dramatically seen in the international sexual abuse crisis, will evolve into something new, something more akin to the concept of co-responsibility. We hope that the theology related to human sexuality will catch up to the science of human sexuality that decades ago ended the diagnosis of homosexuality as a defect or mental illness. You can see the international classification of diseases and related health problems for that information. It's time for the church to move to a view of healthy human sexuality more consistent with science. And we hope that half the human population that has been excluded from ordination, not by dogma or doctrine, but by a discipline, will be granted ordination to enable an explosion of the message of Jesus' love so desperately needed in our world. So hope fuels for us what we see as the prophetic voice of the German church. Both bishops and layperson, all baptized together, that have co-constructed with their conference of bishops and their national layperson organization, a courageous new structure, a synodal path to take on the most challenging and essential issues of our times. Call to Action of Metro New York is a regional chapter of Call to Action USA, and we believe as faithful Catholics, we are called to advocate for justice and equity in the church and in the world. This means we wholeheartedly affirm the ordination of women and the full inclusion of divorced and LGBTQ people. It also means that we take Catholic social teaching very seriously. Its foundational insistence that we work for the common good demands that we speak out about climate justice, name the exploitation and abuse of the current state of capitalism, and actively work to dismantle and eliminate racist practices and structures in our society. We are clear that all of these issues are Catholic conversations and that we have a responsibility to use our voices to drive change. And now Deborah Rose will introduce the panelists and moderator.
Thanks, Art. Those are really inspiring words. And Russ Petrus, my future church co-director, and I, Deborah Rose Milovic, share those sentiments and are pleased to be a partner for this event. We look forward to learning all we can today in support of Pope Francis's vision for a synodal church, a vision that has its roots and our origins over 2,000 years ago and was reborn at the Second Vatican Council. This vision propels the work of Future Church and is carried in the hearts of many, many Catholics around the world today. Just as a reminder, this event is being recorded so that sometime early next week, we will send out the link to the video to everyone who has signed up. Today, it is an honor and a pleasure to introduce our guests. Their CVs are long and very impressive. So I am purposely going to keep them somewhat shorter, just so that we can spend a lot of time in our learning and dialogue together. But if you want to learn more about each of our speakers, I'm going to include that information when I send out the link later at the beginning of the week. Dr. Claudia Lücking-Michel is a highly respected member of Germany's political establishment, as well as Germany's Catholic Church. In 2013, she won a parliament seat where she served on the Committee for Education, Research and Technology Assessment, the Committee for Economic Cooperation and Development. She was Deputy Chairwoman of the Women's Group and the Federal Youth Board of Trustees, and so much more. Since 1993, Claudia has been involved in various functions in the Catholic German Women's Association. In addition to her membership in the Theological Commission, she was head of the International Commission from 1995 and vice president of the association from 1999 to 2008. She is currently a member of the Foundation's Board of Trustees. She also served as vice president of the Central Committee of the German Catholics, the ZDK, since 2005. Dr. Lücking-Michel serves as co-chair of the Forum on Power and Separation of Power in the Church in the German Synodal Way, a forum where she offers her vast expertise. Today, she's going to offer her insights into the progress there. Professor Dr. Margit Eckholt serves as chair of dogmatic and fundamental theology at the University of Osnabrück. She has a rich and illustrious educational history, as well as an impressive and distinguished career developing the theological foundations for interfaith understanding, liberation theologies, women's roles in ministerial work, and so much more. She is a prolific academic writer, sometimes publishing and editing several books a year. In 2021 alone, she co-edited Revelation and Language, Hermeneutic and Theological Approaches from a Christian and Islamic Perspective, as well as Women in Church Ministries, Reform Movements and Ecumenism, published by Liturgical Press. Dr. Eckholt is a member of the Forum on Women's Ministries and Offices for the German Synodal Way process, and will present her insights in the current debates on the expansion of women's participation and leadership within the current framework of church law, as well as women's access to sacramental ministry. Our third speaker is Father James Martin, a well-known author and writer and editor at large at American Magazine. He is a New York Times best-selling author with books such as The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, a Spirituality for Real Life, Jesus, A Pilgrimage, and My Life with the Saints. His outreach to LGBTQ community has been a source of refuge and healing, and his book, Building a Bridge, how the Catholic Church and the LGBT community can enter into a relationship of respect, compassion, and sensitivity, has offered a lifeline of hope to many. In 2021, a documentary film about Father Martin's LGBT ministry, also called Building a Bridge, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City. In 2017, Pope Francis appointed Father Martin as a consultant to the Vatican's Secretariat for Communications. Father Martin is a frequent commentator in the media about issues of religion and spirituality, and is known for his appearances on no less the Colbert Report and other media presence. I want to say again how grateful we are to each of you for graciously agreeing to lead this important conversation about synodality and its impact on the future of the Church. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Eckholt.
Yeah, good evening to you all. Thank you, Deborah, for the presentation, and thank you, Art, for these words of hope. And I'm now showing a presentation. I will here do it. You see it here. And my presentation has 4 short parts. In the first part, I want to show the integration of the Forum 3, Women in Ministries and Services of the Church, where I am member, in the whole structure of the synodal way of our local German church. And you see it here in the sense we have these 4 forums, and here behind, I don't will explain all the whole way. You can see it behind. This is a little bit a historical framework of the synodal way. The aim of the synodal way is to initiate a fundamental and necessary reform process. And this is not a new project for the German local church. Already more than 10 years ago, when the serious abuse in the church was made public, a dialogue process was initiated at the level of the Bishop Conference and with the participation of lay movement. But the worsening crisis in the German local church made this new synodal project necessary. And also in reference to the question of women, these are not new debates. You will see it. The question of participation of women in the church in leadership, women ministries, is a topic of about more than 20, 30 years. And it's an important topic of the main women federations in Germany. And there, the important topic since 2000 and also before, you will see it, the access of women to the women deaconesses. What is important also, Arthur has told it, behind is the great crisis of abuse. This is behind. And in the first year of the synodal way, victims of sexual abuse were involved in each of the 4 synodal forums. Listening to them, this is also what I am experiencing, to them is a central concern of our work in the forums and at the synodal assembly. Their statements form a key signature that shapes the work of the whole synodal way in a decisive way. We are walking. This is an important text of we have presented for the assembly now end of September. We are walking the synodal way, stirred up by the outcry and the lament of the victims of sexualized violence in our church. We walk it as a path of conversion and renewal. We want to hear and proclaim the gospel, God's good news, anew, in words and deeds. We face the critics of those affected by abuse. We confess our guilt and want to draw consequences. We work on the structural causes of sexualized violence and its cover-up in our church. This is a preamble for our text we will also discuss next year, and important beginning of our main document. And the scientific studies concerning the abuse had pointed to clericalism, power, the church's sexual morality, and the lack of women in decision-making positions and in leadership positions in the Church. And these are precisely the issues that we address in the 4 forums of the Synodal Way. And also, this is now what I want here to present. This had been only the overview, the Forum 3, Women in Church Ministries and Services in the Church. Within the framework of the Synodal Way, the question of women, of ministries and offices of women in the Church is dealt with on a broad, theological, well-founded basis. And also, as I have said in the beginning, it has a great historical background in our German Church with Vatican II, after Vatican II, and here the important work, as I have mentioned, of the 2 women federations in Germany. And we have had, so you see, we have the word of the federations. We have also founded an association of theologians, and Claudia and my person, have been also the generation of the founders of this association. And here we are making, and we have made an important, I think, also theological work behind this doing of the women federations. And you see also this book we have presented this year also in English. What is behind? And you see, it is important, I want to mention it because the theological topics, also our topics here in the Forum Women in Church, are not topics of today. These are the topics of Vatican II and the process after Vatican II. We have had the debate with Karl Rahner, with Lehmann, with many others about church and democracy, etc. And in the Synod of Würzburg, we have had these important discussions also about lay people participation, women, deaconess, etc. This is behind, but now we are taking it, sure, it's another moment, and also other theological backgrounds. We are working not only with feminist theological methods, we have also gender approaches, etc. We have, in this sense, widened our horizon also in an interdisciplinary, intercultural sense. Commitment to gender justice and breaking down male power structures are the guiding principles of our Forum 3. Our Zielvereinbarung, our Tartan agreement is, and you see it here, the text I'm citing, women experience a growing discrepancy between their own self-image, the reality of life in our society and church positions. Women are discriminated, not taken seriously, and their concerns disregarded. There is displeasure and a lack of understanding that many ministers do not see this as a deplorable state of affairs and justify their position with theological arguments that have long since been refuted. And with this in mind, the Forum 3 has set itself 3 focal points for its work, which are dealt with in various subgroups by the approximately 40 members of the Forum. You see here our topics we have decided 1.5 years before, and we are working regularly now sure in Zoom meetings. And first point, what is possible with regard to the participation of women in the ministries and offices of the Church under the current conditions of church law? And the second point, how gender anthropological perspectives can be reread theologically. And third point, what perspectives can be formulated on this background with regard to the participation of women in sacramental ministry. We meet, as I said, regularly in video conferences. The whole forum and the individual working groups have identified various thematic areas. The first working group had already prepared about 14 pages document in September last year for the regional conferences which took place in various places in Germany. The other groups have presented text parts, modules, and discussed these at the Digital Synodal Assembly in February of this year. And in this way, the structure for our documents, we have a basic text and we have text for action. The structure for the basic text of the forum has been developed, which after being developed and voted on in the forum, it has been presented in this Synodal Assembly end of September. And also we have presented just 3 texts for action, Handlungstexte, as we say in German. And in this text, we have focused the significance of the debate in a world church perspectives on women in leadership and of parishes, an important second text, and a third text, women and their qualification and access to theological faculties and institutes, gender justice in this way. And we have also prepared, and we are doing this job also in the further weeks, prepared other texts, for example, an important document, a Handlungstext, text for action about women deaconesses. In this sense, we are here developing our main topics and our line of gender justice, and in this sense, what is possible in the sense of canon law and what has to be developed further, the important topic of women and sacramental ministries. The work of our forum is thus concerned, on the one hand, with a look at the offices already held by women and open to women with theological and pastoral qualifications at parish or diocesan level, with a greater presence of women in leadership positions in dioceses and at the level of the Bishops' Conference, but also their tasks as pastoral ministers in the service of the proclamation, the preaching of the gospel, or in the administration and leadership, in the sense of sacraments such as baptism and marriage assistance, as well as their more extensive involvement in the leadership of parishes, an activity for which women, on the background of Canon 517, paragraph 2, of canonical law in various German dioceses, such as my diocese, have already been qualified for and introduced to in recent years. And on the other hand, as I said, the access of women to the sacramental offices, ministries, such as diaconate, priesthood, and also to become bishop, is also being discussed and also worked in our main text in a very fundamental theological way. And I think this will be a very important text, and we have developed this text in different working groups. For example, a working group in Bible, biblical background, historical background, systematical perspectives from Vatican II, and also a reflection about sacramentality of the church, sacraments, and sure also the pastoral approaches, pastoral, and also the topics of gender justice. In our main document, we are in this sense working very hardly, and we are also in this sense, we are discussing the binding text, and this is an important topic. We are discussing it in our forum with lay people, with priests, with bishops, and this binding text, you know, here the text and here you see behind, yeah, in the 14th century, there have been also in the image of women, it has been here a picture of a woman in the 14th century, that women as priests. But behind, I want to say it here, behind, you know, are the important document, the text of John Paul II, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, and sure canon law 1024, only the baptized man validly receives a sacred ordination. And from this perspective, also of the universal church, it is not, I think, a small contribution of the German local church to discuss the question of sacramental ordination of women in the context of a synodal way of the whole local church in a well-founded theological way. And we show here the weakness of the theological argumentation of the past, and we also show how it could be possible. And this is also a work we are doing, like a work going at the side of the synodal way. In other texts, in books we are preparing about this great discussion of the Representatio Christi by women. And as this is, in this sense, our conviction here that, and we have discussed it in an important congress in my university in December 2017, it is our conviction that we have not to give reasons for the access to sacramental ministries for women, but for the exclusion of women from these ministries. And also, this is our conviction that a final binding decision on women's access to all church offices has not yet been made. Sure, this is a great discussion also in our forum, because we have here also here the presence of very different voices. But this is for me an experience of important synodality. And there's only some pictures or photos you see also of your context. We are working together and we are rereading texts of our mothers in theology of the time of Vatican II, after Vatican II. We have here important mothers or grandmothers in this work. Now, my reflection about this synodal way, or my work, it's my personal reflection about here my experience as theologian, also women theologian in Forum 3. And I think it's for me a very spiritual discernment process. The interaction of voices from pastoral work and youth or women's association work, from theological science, from church, parish leadership, the voices of bishops, lay people, priests, deacons, men and women, especially the voices of young people who work in the forum, is a lively, exciting, and highly, I think, creative process. Sure, also with many tensions, in which everyone begins to understand and learn together. I think it's my experience and my hope what synodality means. The different voices are a reflection of the Catholic diversity of our local church and the pluralization of pastoral and theological options. And you see it here, we have also put it in one of our main documents, and we have discussed about this text also in September in our the whole assembly. I'm reading here this important text. The Synodal Assembly represents and embodies faith in God in a plural way. Gathered and united by the Holy Spirit, it lives and experiences the rich diversity of the Church, united in the common faith to which all believers bear witness. They pray to God, celebrate the liturgy together, and live the diaconal mission of the Church in service to all people. This unity does not exclude the possibility that in the future two different positions will be taken in mutual respect on certain questions of church life and doctrine. Thus, all those involved in the synodal way are struggling together for the way of the Church into the future and continue to seek synodal understanding. And of course, often it becomes clear for me in the discussions how individual voices positions themselves, how boundary lines are drawn, especially with regard to the interpretation of the binding nature of magistral documents, such as I've cited John Paul's text and letter Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, and how in the various theological points of view and their approach to the relationship between scripture, tradition, and the signs of the times, the debates opened up by the Second Vatican Council on the significance of pastoral practice and experience continue to have a profound importance and effect. The work in the Synodal Forum here reveals the central theological and pastoral areas of conflict of the last decades. And this, I think, is good. At last, topics are being openly discussed, which were either negotiated in a church gray zone, such as the participation of women in sacramental ministry, or which have been taboo and could not be openly discussed, such as the whole access of women to the sacramental ministries. And on the other hand, in a painful way, the magisterial position, ordinatio sacerdotalis, are played in as an expression of Catholic faith that seems to be at stake when changes are called for in the service of evangelization and a credible church. Here it becomes clear how important the worldwide synodal process opened by Pope Francis is, which is to lead to the Synod of Bishops in October 2023, where fundamental questions of synodality are to be clarified, and at all, I think the processes of voting and to integrate here women, the tension between local, pastoral and theological developments and universal, ecclesial, legal and magisterial settings, which still guides the reception of the Council today, is a central moment that requires further clarifications. And this is for me the moment here also to speak about this spiritual discernment. The synodal way for me is in this sense as a profound spiritual way, a way of faith. It leads us into a very special depth of Christian revelation. It is not about peripherals. It is not, as the critics want to interpret it, about a merely functional understanding of church when it comes to the wider participation of women in ministries and offices. We are in the midst of question of faith here, in some ways in the midst of a spiritual battle, and it's precisely why the synodal way needs a very special depth of evangelization. In this sense also, sure, this has been also in the letter of Pope Francis at the beginning of our synodal way. And to finish here, also its time slot, only a short word, the World Church dimension of the work in our synodal forum, and for me as a forum women. And we have here also a text we have presented of our forum women 3 for the assembly last September. And I'm citing here the text. We understand our deliberations in Forum 3 of the Synodal Way as a contribution within the worldwide synodal process to which Pope Francis has invited with the theme for a synodal church, communion, participation and mission, and which is to be concluded with the Synod of Bishops in October 2023. And we say synodal processes have also begun previously in other regions of the world. It is our wish that the World Synod of Bishops on questions of synodality will trust the sensus fidelium of the whole people of God and open a space in an equal way also to the faith experiences, pastoral practices, and theological research of women. The synodal way of the German local church is seen as a sign of hope, and you, Art, in the beginning have talked about this. Thank you also for your comment. And our text, we have put it here, is seen as a sign of hope for the universal church, because clergy and laity, men and women, participate and listen to each other in the forums and votes in an equal way. And from this, perspectives arise for the personal organization of the worldwide synodal process. And the wish is expressed that a constructive discussion of the previous decisions of the magisterium on the question of the ministries and offices of women is made possible. In this process, forms of communication are to be found with guarantee that even in the face of different positions, we can remain together on the path and meet to the other positions with appreciation. And in this sense, the synodal way of the German local church is also a challenge from the perspective of the world church. In all the questions raised in our forum, it is a matter of overcoming the ever-widening gap between life and faith and making the Church credible as Church of Jesus Christ, whichever sets out on the path of conversion. The questions dealt with on the synodal way about power, participation, greater participation of laity, especially women, overcoming clerical structures, and a serious confrontation with the ways of life in modernity, the topic of sexuality, point to the root of the crisis, which does not stop at the churches of the South either, when many Catholics here join new Christian communities and Pentecostal churches, which enable lay people and especially women to participate to a greater extent. A new culture of relationships, gender justice, new forms of exercising the ministry, and a break with clericalism and man-alien structures are not only touchstones for the Church ability to inculturate modern society, but also touchstones for whether the Church itself is ready for a new conversion to the Word of God and to listen to the liberating message of the Kingdom of God. And in our draft, the draft of our preamble of the Synodal Way, there is written, we want to be a learning church on our spiritual journey that brings us together. We stand for being a synodal church under the leadership of the Pope, in which all are heard and can participate in setting the course for the future. We do not trust in simple forecasts for our church. Instead, we build on a future that is open to surprising turns and developments. We trust in Jesus' promise that God's Spirit will guide us in all truth. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Professor Eckel. That is so inspiring. We do hope that the Church will listen to the Sensus Fidelium. That is for sure. So I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Claudia Luking-Michel, and she will give her presentation on power in the Church.
Power in the Church. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, for the invitation, and for your interest in our work in the Synodal Way. Margit gave you the overview and the theological framework and the basics. I am more from the practical side, as I'm co-leader of one of the forum and a part of the board with the bishops together, so I can inform you about the way how we really work, where are the problems or where are the structure to do it. But first of all, now to forum number 1, power in the Church. And you will see it's all linked together. And one can say the question of power is the very beginning we have to solve first, or you will find that many of the aspects Margit named already will be the same now in my presentation. I bring you 7 different steps, and I start with my reflection about where do we stand and the dimensions and challenges of the crisis. And I have to repeat it once again, as otherwise one can't understand the origin, the genesis of the Synodal Way and the power we have now to change something. There is a serious institutional crisis in our Church. We had to learn about the dimension of sexual abuse, not only to face the many cases of sexualized violence and of clerics against children and young people, but, and now that's the point of forum number 1, we had also to realize that this corresponds to ecclesiastical structures, to an attitude to protect priests from critical questioning, as well as from sustained control and limitation. The covering up and the protection of the offenders have not only individual but also systemic causes. In cases of sexual and spiritual abuse, of course, the perpetrator himself becomes guilty. At first, very important. But at the same time, an institution that does not prevent such action and protects perpetrators even is guilty as well. Everybody who has responsibility in church is called to action. But what we experience is still a denial and the refusal to take over responsibility and the lack of openness to real reforms. And of course, now there is a deep crisis of credibility in our church. Church structures are perceived as authoritarian. And I have to admit, add, the legal system of the church does not meet the human rights-based standards of democratic societies we are used to normally nowadays. As Margit said, there is a gap between the doctrine and the practice of life in our church. And there is a gap in how power is actually conceived and exercised in our church. And this gap must be closed in regard to the message of the gospel, of course. But we won't fulfill our mission if we do not really recognize the character, the causes, and the dimensions of this crisis, and face up to it and work seriously on solutions. And now this is my point, this concerns above all the systematic causes of abuse of power. And it concerns the sexualized as well as spiritual violence in our church. The sensus fidelium of all the Baptists therefore calls for more shared responsibility, cooperative action, and enforceable rights of participation. And I'm quite sure once shared responsibility is really accepted, then this will create sufficient transparency in the use of power of the church. A look at history shows that at different times and depending to the social cultural environment and the current challenges, there have been many ways of shaping the structure of the church. Nowadays, we should measure it at the standards of a plural, open society in a democratic constitutional state. Many critics of the synodal way say that this is a contradiction to church itself. But I would answer no, even more, it's maybe a model, a helpful pattern for a credible proclamation of the gospel. So in the Synodal Assembly, in Forum 1, we are really convinced that the understanding and use of power must be critically examined. Otherwise, we won't use the other problems and we won't the case at all. And the main question always is, does this ecclesiastical power and the way we live it really serve the proclamation of the gospel, or does it hinder it? We are used to a theology of church, a spirituality of obedience, and the practice of ministry that really ties the understanding of power to ordination and this is even worse, declares it sacrosanct. Thus, it is protected from any criticism, disconnected from scrutiny, and detached far away from any real division. This really obscures the mission of the church And as this dark shadow reaches into the institutional core of the church, it also affects the image of God, which we do try to proclaim, and the message of the gospel we try to live. And that's really the innermost point of every evangelization. So when anybody says we need more evangelization and less structural reform, I can say this is not an alternative. We have to do the structural reform to be more authentical and convincible in the evangelization. Step number 2. Some insight in the discussion, in the debates in our forum. And to give you an idea, we are about 30 members in the forum, delegated from the plenary, from all different backgrounds and perspectives of church. So we have really hard to discuss. And our papers really need a majority of when we make our Abstimmung about this. But now, where are we? What have we really understood, and what is now common sense? We have understood that the legal culture in our church must be oriented towards fundamental human rights. We had understood that even, or perhaps one must say especially, spiritually based leadership must be effectively bound by law and legal protection. We have understood that sharing and controlling power is not an attack on the authority of our church and of the offices, but instead the attribution of authority increases when they are really committed to clear standards of quality and established by others. So, and we understood by always power in the church must be measured by the gospel of God's love. Perhaps the most important thing, we have understood that in large parts of our society here in Germany or even in Western Europe, a church that is primarily concerned with itself is seen as unattractive and useless. Structural and legitimacy issues are undoubtedly challenges that we must face. But it's not already the fulfillment of the task, it's not the aim of our way, but only its precondition. People are equally interested in whether the church provides them with a space for experiencing and encountering God, and whether it fulfills a critical prophetic mission to our society. Church should be close and concrete and orienting and helpful. Step number 3 for today, or for this evening at least. When now the discussion started, it very soon became quite clear when really the sensus fidelium is asked, when people are forced to participate, when we discuss about majorities, about also principles and very important sentences and decisions in our church, then we have to discuss about the balance between plurality and unity. Church and theology have been always plural and diverse, and they are still. But some of our leaders, of our bishops, deny it and say, okay, we have to unite everybody, and this only works with one strong leadership figure, with the Pope at the top of everything. But diversity is neither a weakness of the church nor a failure of leadership. Cultivating diversity without breaking apart as a community, I would say that could be understood as a hallmark of Catholicism. And when Second Vatican II declared programmatically, Christ is the light of the nations, and from here on developed the real character and nature of the church. We know it all, Lumen Gentium, the church is in Christ, as it were, the sacrament that is the sign and instrument of the most intimate union with God, as well as of the unity of all humanity. Then we hear it, there must be diversity. There must be plurality, and the reform of ecclesiastical power and power relations is necessary for the sake of the sacramentality of the church. Just as far to the theological background, and I'm quite sure there is much more to say, but of course, power structure and power in church, then you have to go one step further and talk about the practical changement, what you need. The necessary steps on the way to the reform of ecclesiastical power structures. So, and now really we come one step closer to real changes. But we are still in the debate of what is to be clarified, what we have to conscious before we go on. And so step number 4, we need clear concepts and precise distinctions. What is your understanding of power? What are you talking about? Okay, there are different definitions we all know about from definitions of philosophy or politics. But to keep it short and simple, those who have power have opportunities to realize their own interest and to enforce them and to enforce their own will, even if the others don't want, if there is opposition. And this is precisely, and in a short nutshell, why power has to be tied to legitimacy, to procedures. In our church, at this point, we often hear, oh, no problem. In our church, power is to be exercised as a service. Oh, this is very difficult. As of course, we all want that power is exercised as a service. But all the same, to keep out the problem that it is used to oppress the weak, but really instead used in the sense of strengthening in solidarity the powerless, we have really to look very close and very critically on our concept of leadership. And we really have to be careful when anybody says, okay, our power is only ministry. That means any concept of power in church must be provided with a qualitative reservation. It must become effective in service to the powerless. Only this is the way how it gains authority and legitimacy. Then you all knew that in dogmatics and in canon law, we speak of 3 offices or tasks or munera of the faithful. The laity and the clergy participate in all 3 offices, in different ways, of course. But please be careful that not too quick we divide it and put the very important parts of power to the sacramentally conferred officially authorities only. Let's make sure that all the ecclesiastical legal order must be open to structural reform, and that makes really room for the sense of faith of all God's people. Step number 5. At latest, at this point of the discussion, anybody says, oh, no, there is the church law. We have the canon law. And now this was more a strategic question and decision than a theological one. We are committed in using the current church law to resolve blockages and to use it as long as we can and to make possible what could be possible if only our church leaders wanted it. That means we are in our papers, in our strategies, in our ideas of how to solve the problems, we are committed to applying current church law in such a way that power is bindingly and delegated to the Baptist and confirmed in the dioceses, and that effective control procedures are established. And at least in regard to the German situation of our church, there is much free space. A lot of reforms could be done within the current church law. But of course, we won't stop there. But when there are solutions only possible when we go further, then we are convinced church law is not the gospel itself. But we have always to measure it and to look for new ways which are really answers of the needs of the time. Step 6, and then you may be sure that I'm near to the end. Reforms of our power structure is also a way to create freedom. What do I want to say? Our church must create space for all the faithful to bring in their personal gifts and talents for evangelization. It is therefore necessary to break down the asymmetrical power imbalance that exists in the church. And in order to secure the rights of the faithful and to prevent the abuse of power in future, we have to prevent the abuse of the power of ordination and leadership. Standards must be observed which result from the mission of the church in the world and which creates freedom to all, to bring in the charisma from all the faithful. And that's the point to discuss once again about what is democratic principles, democracy and church. I'm convinced it's not an opposite, but it fits very well together. Then democratic societies are founded on the idea of freedom and the equal dignity of all people. So decisions that affect everyone are made and have to be made collectively. In the biblical narratives, which present man as the image of God, that means we are called to responsible freedom. And this image of man finds a basis. So it's not a problem to try to use the best parts of democratic solutions and to implement them in church, then it's a really good idea, as it might be a good possibility to create freedom for all the charismas of all of the Catholics. The church recognizes democracy and human rights as a form of coexistence that corresponds to freedom and to the equal dignity of persons. But only outside of herself, in society and world community. No, people who meet as equals in this way and live in a vital state democracy expect the same within their church. And of course, now step 7 is synodalität, as a principle of the church. So church has a long tradition of common deliberative and decision-making structures in form of synods. And this synodal moment must be strengthened in view of the vocation and rights of the faithful. But at present canon law, Margit showed us the picture, provides that only bishops have decision-making rights in synods. We experienced it actually with the bishop synod, which is called up for spring next year. Only men, only bishops. This restriction must be overcome without, of course, denying the pastoral leadership of the bishops. But the synodality of the church is more than the collegiality of the bishops. So for the Catholic Church, it is important that decision-making processes are tied back to the interests and ideas of the faithful, all of them, as their dignity is rooted in their sense of faith. So to come to an end and to sum it up, what is now the state of debate in our papers? It's not at the end. We still have to bring it in the plenary and to bring it to all the democratic processes we have committed us to in the synodal way. So to sum it up, we really need a qualified and legally guaranteed participation in all deliberation and all decision-making processes of the church, of all the church members. And therefore, we want to do it through a synodal consultation and decision-making process, constitution, project, at the level of all church bodies. A very important first step is that we change the system, how bishops, how the leaders of a parish, how always the leadership figures are appointed. So a diocese has to be integrated in the way how to appoint, or even better, how to elect their next bishop. We need and we have to establish effective forms of control of power. And we need transparency in the decision-making processes. I don't have to underline that we also are committed of making ministries and offices in the church accessible to all the baptized and confirmed and according to their charisms and vocations. Then we are convinced that it will be a long way. We have to go still a long way on our synodal way. But for the sake of evangelization, we have to do it. And we are happy to experience that not only many people and many Catholics of the church here in Germany are together on the way, but that there is interest and cooperation in so many different parts of the Catholic Church around the world. And as well, tonight, I'm very happy about all your interest, and I feel that you are with us on the way, on the synodal way, and motivated by our mission to be Zeugen der wahren Hoffnung. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. We're very happy to have heard your wonderful points about power in the church. And the next person we're going to hear from is Father Martin, who's going to talk about this experience in terms of how he sees it in terms of the influence into the universal church. So I'll turn this over to Father Martin.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I want to say thank you especially to the two distinguished panelists. I'm very conscious of time, and I know that we need time for questions and answers, and I have very little to add, so I'm going to abbreviate my remarks a bit so that we have more time for some synodality and some for questions and answers. So basically, I think that the German Synod is providing an example to the Church of what Pope Francis likes to refer to as parousia, which is boldness. One of the things that surprised me and delighted me when I was listening to the deliberations was how often people were able to speak about topics that are in many places and in many dioceses seen as taboo. And it reminds me of what Pope Francis said at the beginning of the Synod of the Family: let no one say that this cannot be discussed. And as our previous speaker just said, questions especially about power are very important. Synods fell into synods were kind of rejuvenated from an ancient idea in the Second Vatican Council, and then established formally by Pope Paul VI in 1965, yet they fell into disuse and became rather predictable. There were many synods, but it seemed as almost that their outcome was already foreordained. Francis rejuvenated it. It's very much along the lines of a Jesuit ideal. It goes much along the lines of discernment, which is a prayerful way of making decisions and a key part of Jesuit spirituality. It's a key part of the spirituality of the spiritual exercises, discerning the spirits. And it presumes that the Spirit is at work in all people, not simply in power structures, but in all people, in the laity, in clergy, of course, in bishops, but in all people in the whole church. And so what Pope Francis is doing really by calling the synod, this synod on synods, is leading the church through a communal discernment, really listening to the Holy Spirit. And I think that that's the fundamental difference between Pope Francis and his opponents. One of the sort of guiding spirits of the guiding principles of the synod is that the Holy Spirit is at work in everyone. And this is something that Pope Francis, as a Jesuit, deeply believes. As a former spiritual director, a former novice director, a former provincial, he has listened to people talk about how the Holy Spirit is at work in them. And yet, when that is sort of presented to the world, many of his opponents say, well, that means anything goes, or that's a terrible thing. We have all these rules. And so in Amoris Laetitia, you see the response to the idea of using conscience, when it comes to divorced and remarried Catholics, how upsetting that is to some people. And so the Synod, I think, is a real sign of this, that Pope Francis really does trust that the Holy Spirit is at work in everyone. I think that the German Synod is providing a great example for us in their openness and in their, I would say, their readiness to listen to the Holy Spirit. It is not a foreordained synod. There was a joke that used to go around when John Paul was in charge of the synods, that John Paul was sitting over in the corner writing something at the beginning meeting of one of the synods. I'm sure you've heard this. And someone said, "What is he writing?" And he said, "He's writing the final document." Right. So there was a sense that these things were already foreordained. That is not the case now. I think so. I'm going to be very brief. As I said, I think one of the questions that is very important for a lot of Americans when they see the German Synod, and I would be curious how our panelists would respond to this, and I've put this to people in Rome as well, is that what if you don't live in a country like Germany, and what if your bishops are not as open to the idea of a synod, right? I think that I say, I wish I lived in Germany sometimes when I think of all the wonderful things that are going on in the church and the leaders. But it is clear that the idea of the synod has not been embraced across the United States as much as it has been in Germany. I think that's actually a fair statement. And there are many people who have written to me and saying, what happens if my diocese or my pastor isn't interested in it? And so will the Synod on Synods be a synod just for the countries that take an interest in it? And what will that do to synodality? So anyway, just a few comments. I do want to leave time for questions and answers. And once again, and I have very little to add to our wonderful panelists. They are obviously the experts on the German Synod. So that's my brief contribution.
Thanks so much, Father Jim. So we're going to have some question and answer time here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you have a question, they're at the bottom of your screen is this reaction where you can hold up your hand, use the little button, or if you can't figure out where that is, do this, and I will call on you. So let's start out with questions. I don't know if Margit or Claudia, if you want to respond to Father Jim at all right away, maybe, or we can just go into some other questions here. Just go ahead. Okay. So I'm not sure the name here. There's a Peggy. You want to ask your question, Peggy Hebert? You have to unmute, Peggy.
Thank you. It is Hebert. And
Hebert. Okay.
My question is, how do we prevent the same polarization in a democratic church as we presently have in society?
Did you want one person in particular to answer that? We're directing it at one of the
I guess if I had to direct it to once, I would direct it to Dr. Claudia, because she was addressing the practicalities of this synodal process.
Okay, if I may, I would try to answer immediately as you address it to me. Thank you. I'm not quite sure whether one can say that the problems and the negative aspects of democratic structures, maybe we have really a chance to prevent completely that it comes to church. But I experience a church which is polarized, which is fallen into parts even now without any democratic structure and democratic ways to handle problems. So I see the negative and bad sides of democratic solutions, but all the same, at the moment, for this time of humanity, I think it's one of the best ways to organize power. And I would very much appreciate if our church takes over the good parts of it.
Great, thank you. Molly Weller, you have a question? Make sure you unmute and tell us who you want to direct it to if you have somebody specific.
Hi, yes, I don't really know who to address this to, but it's kind of a big question. I'm wondering about the, I realize Germany has been very successful and is ahead of us in the synodal process. I'm speaking about ahead of the United States, and I know that the relationship in Germany between the government and the church is quite different than in the United States between the government and the church. For example, in Germany, as I understand it, there is kind of a general tax that supports the church, and in our country, we're supposed to have the separation of that. And yet, even though we're supposed to have the separation of church and state, the Conference of the United States Bishops is really quite powerful and does make large financial contributions and is a large lobbying body in our government. And so there's a lot of, so a lot of the US bishops are in opposition to the Pope. And I'm just really kind of wondering how this is going to play out. And again, it's a really big question, but I'm just wondering about how our political system in the United States really kind of ties into this problem. So if anybody can address that, how does the relationship work in Germany, and how might that facilitate this process. So I guess I'm directing that to the Germans.
Margie, can you respond?
Yes, sure, I can respond. I think Claudia, as politician, is here also the colleague to answer, but sure, as our system sure is different. We have not a strict separation between government and this structures and church, and we have a cooperation, or we have certain, how to say it in English, also Staatskirchenverträge, also treaties, ne? And also with the whole Germany, but also with different parts, ne? And governments here in Germany. And I can, for example, I can tell you a certain point interesting for you, because I am working in a university where we are forming future professors in religion. And we have here a very important cooperation in Germany. And here, for example, all the religious education is also in the state system, and sure, we have also the liberty of religious freedom, etc. Sure, at the age here 14 and forward, they can decide, but it's an important also of the state and a task to provide, sure, with the church also the religious education. And here also, sure, we have also a system that the state here is paying also in this sense. And this only as one example, and you see here a cooperation. And this means, for example, that our children and then the youth who are going to school, they receive a very good religious education. And this is not a catechesis, it's a religious education to receive also a knowledge about the Christian faith, but also knowledge of the other in the ecumenical, interreligious perspective today, and also what Claudia has also spoken about in her conference, human dignity, the services, also being at the side of migrants, etc. And I think here we have a very developed structure that many organizations also of the church are receiving financial support by the state, but in this sense, because this is not only a service to the church ad intra, because we are here, and I think we have a system developed to be church in the world, in the sense of Vatican II, in the sense of religious liberty and of dialogue with the other, communication. And this is a point, I think, that in the German also church, or churches, I can say, because it's all the same for the other, the Protestant churches, etc. And in this sense, I think we have developed culture of dialogue, of communication, and also a culture of discussion. I have also a knowledge of countries in the South, as Latin America, etc., also in other countries in Europe. And I think this culture of discussion, this is also something what you find in the movements of the lay people, the lay federations, etc. And this is here very important. And perhaps this is the other culture. And to the differences you see also, and in this sense, you have said, Molly, in United States, there is not many critic in reference to Pope Francis. In Germany, it has been on the contrary. When with Pope Francis, there has been a spirit of liberty and welcome, very, very important. Sure, we have also now moments of certain depression, sure, because we are wanting more reforms and concrete signs for reform. But important is, I think, this reception of the style of communication, of evangelization, all this, and which is very important of Francis.
Jim, did you want to add something?
No, that's okay. That's very
okay,
thoughtful.
very good. Thank you very much. there's someone, PJ Kakuti. I can't tell what the name is. You have a question.
Sorry, my name is Paula.
Paula, okay, you did. Thanks. I had to guess. All right.
That's just my email address. All right. I do have a question. I'm not sure who to address it to, perhaps Dr. Eckholt, but whoever can answer it best. I was wondering, are the bishops under pressure from Rome or themselves to, to block the needed changes which the 4 working groups are working towards recommending?
Margit, you'll have to unmute. Claudia,
Yeah.
both of you. I'd like to hear from both of you on that.
I think we two also we can answer. I think we cannot generalize it here in this sense, because I think this is my impression. Also in my forum, but also I have been here also in Frankfurt in the Synodal Assembly. We are all the bishop and lay people, priests, deacons, etc., we are and religious people, and we are all in a learning process. And I'm seeing here also that many bishops, not all are bishops of reforms. The dioceses are also very pluralistic in Germany, in the south or in the east. The situation in Eastern Germany is very different because this has been the ex-DDR and on another system, etc. Yeah, and reform also to have a certain position. This is also very pluralistic in Germany. And for so, I think we have here, as what I'm noting, that the bishops are going a reform way. Sure, we have, this has been the same in Council Vatican II, a minority in the council, a minority in the sense of Cardinal Ottaviani, etc., which doesn't want any reform, etc., and the structure of Societas Perfecta, etc. But in this process, the council has been a sign of this living spirit in the church, in the world. And this is a hope what I have. And I don't see here in this sense, yes, pressure, and not a pressure on the bishops. And this for me is not Pope Francis. No, to go the way, sure, in the sense of Pope Francis, respect also to the doctrines, etc. But we are here in a way, and also to discuss the topics of sexuality, of ministries, of power, etc. And this is something of the living spirit I see. No structure, parousia, as you have said in the beginning, Father James.
Very good. Thank you. Marilee, you have a question?
Yes. Young people today are turning off from the church, and the Synod is seen as one opportunity to be able to reclaim some of the vigor in the church. If the Synod fails in its mission, what do we say to these young people, especially young people in the United States? I mean, you women in Germany are so far ahead of us in this country, but Father Jim, what do we say to young people if this Synod fails?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I think, and I don't mean for this answer to be funny or dismissive, but I think that's assuming that young people even know what the Synod is. I think most adult Catholics in the United States have no clue that this is going on. If I said to 90% of Catholics, what do you think about the Synod? They would say, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think one of the reasons for that is because of the lack of participation by some of the bishops and some of the dioceses. Now, if you said to some Catholics, what do you think about the March for Life? You would get a lot of response. They would know that because the bishops have been promoting that. And so, I mean, I think that the Synod, as our participants were saying, is a tremendous opportunity for the church. And I think that, even if it is not participatory in the United States, which, there are places you can look, National Catholic Reporter, someone just put up an article that said that, let's see who wrote this article, so you can find it. Christine Schenk wrote an article, "Is your diocese promoting the Synod? No matter what, you can still participate." And so that's wonderful that people are able to do that. But I think even if it is not participatory, and I think there's a good chance that many dioceses simply won't participate, and that many Catholics, including young people in the United States, will not have their voices heard. We have to say that. That is a real danger. Nonetheless, I think that the deliberative nature of the Synod and the kinds of things that are going on in Germany, the United States is just one country, I think is going to fundamentally, or could fundamentally, change the church. It could fundamentally change the way that the decisions are made. It could fundamentally change the way that bishops' conferences and the church in general makes decisions going ahead. So I think that it has the chance to really upend some of the things that we've been talking about, including the power structures. And I would think that would be what really helps young people feel included. So, for example, the Synod finishes and Pope Francis issues his what's called the post-synodal apostolic exhortation, which is, which is going to be talking about what he has heard. And that is probably going to be followed up, as is usual, by some change in church law and some change in church practice. And that, I think, will open things up. So I think long-term, people may feel more able to participate. But to be honest, I think, we are really, I would say, at the mercy of the bishops who decide or not decide to include their dioceses in the Synod, which is unfortunate. But I don't think that too many young Catholics are aware of it yet. And with that, I have to ring off. And I just want to say very briefly, it's an honor to be with these panelists, with Dr. Eckhold and Dr. Luking. You're doing wonderful work. Thank you for inviting me, but I have something at 3:30. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Father Martin,
Okay,
for
God
joining
bless.
us.
Bye-bye.
Great. So we're going to have time for just one more question, because we're going to wrap this up here at 3:30. So Sylvia, you have a question? You can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah.
Good.
So my question goes in the same direction as what Father James said. So I would like to look a bit further. So what happens after the synodal pass in Germany? I'm sure that you are talking about it. You have some decisions to take. And how do you see the stage of the implementation? Because you were talking about changing the system of appointing leaders, eventually electing leaders. And I was wondering, okay, the purpose would be to decentralize certain things. But the major changes would not happen without changing canon law and without transforming ecclesiology. So I was wondering, do you have this in mind when you are taking this? You are voting in the forums. So I'm sure that you want to see real change as well. So what will happen not to be at the mercy of bishops and other forums? Thank you so much.
Claudia, or?
Yeah, may I?
Yeah. Yes, please.
I would like to answer. So first of all, depending on the mercy of the bishops, otherwise you won't have a synodal participation or synod in your diocese. I'm convinced that very few of our bishops decided to have this synodal way voluntarily. They didn't want. They didn't want at all. But there was a lot of pressure by the situation. Remember the origin. This is the point where we always have to remember the crisis we are in. The structure, the system failed in a way we couldn't imagine even before. So it was not a voluntarily decisions, but there have been oppressed, really desperately looking for a way to change the situation. And even now in the discussions, in the deliberating the papers, looking forward for any implementation. There won't be many who really voluntarily implement changes which they don't like. They will try to prevent as long as they can, as much as they can. But there have to be other peoples, Catholics, who say, okay, stop it. Now we have to change. Otherwise we will lose the youth and the women, and we will lose the mission at all. So there must be also some fights, some conflicts you have to stand and to ask for, otherwise there won't be any change. And the situation is a lot of pressure. And regarding the Roman Synod next year, it can't be a success when the women were not, or other way around, when only bishops start to deliberate there. They have to change the system. So it's nice now that we have been invited to prepare the synod, and that some synod dioceses at least started the process, but it can't be a success when they don't change the way to combine and to set together the members of synod.
Thank you, Claudia. So I put a notice in the chat box for other questions. I see other hands, but we're already at 90 minutes. So if you want to put those in the chat box or send them to me at debrose@futurechurch.org, we're happy to send those on to our presenters to see if they can give you some interesting answers. The other thing that I'm not sure if everyone knows, but even if your parish is not, or your diocese is not engaging in this process, one of the documents for how to go forward says that they also want participation from everybody, so other groups. So if you're in a community, if you're in a place where your bishop is not engaging in the process, it is beholden upon you to gather and to talk and then to send something to them. I would suggest early, but they've pushed that date back until August. But in this way, your voice has a chance of being heard as the preparatory document for the synod is being made. So I would very much encourage that people do that and get together with whoever you can within your communities. And I know that Future Church plans on doing some work with our constituency because we think we have a particular point of view for people to engage in certain aspects of church reform. So we want to make sure that that goes forward. So just to encourage you all to get your voice out there, no matter what your bishop is doing. It's great if they're engaged, but make sure that you are able to get your voice in anyway. So thank you, Margit and Claudia, for your wonderful presentations and for your generous offering of your time. And as we close, I'm going to turn this back over to Art McGrath and for our final goodbyes.
Thank you, Deborah Rose, and the leadership of Future Church and the entire board of CTA Metro New York, and to all of you who've attended today. In particular, thank you to Claudia and Margit for joining us on this Saturday evening and sharing your journey, which is really a dramatic story of what is going on in the German church. And we wish you well with the ongoing navigation of the troubled waters of the voyage that you are taking and partially taking on our behalf as well. And thank you to Father Jim. We're so grateful for your continued willingness to join us today and place yourself in the difficult discussions and challenges of the church. And thank you to the attendees for joining us today. We hope everyone will stay safe with COVID this winter, and please continue to follow Future Church and Call to Action. You'll be hearing from us soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thanks, Art. Have a wonderful evening, morning, day, whatever. Thank you, Margit. Thank you, Claudia. We're just so grateful you're with us.